Next, she replied, is to consciously send higher divine energy to the exact spot identified by the pain, intending that the love will transform the cells there into a state of perfect functioning. I just stared. Go ahead, she said. Get completely connected again. I'll guide you through it. I nodded when I was ready. Feel the pain with all your being, she began. And now begin to image your love energy going right into the heart of the pain, lifting that exact point of your body, the atoms themselves, into a higher vibration. See the particles take a quantum jump into the pure energy pattern that is their optimum state. Literally, feel a tingling sensation in that spot as the vibration accelerates. After pausing for a full minute, she continued, Now, without changing your focus on the point of the pain, begin to feel your energy, the tingle, moving up both legs, through your hips, into your abdomen and chest, and finally into your neck and head. Feel your whole body tingling with a higher vibration. See every organ operating at optimal efficiency. I followed her instructions exactly, and after a few moments, my whole body felt lighter, more energized. I held that state for about 10 minutes, then opened my eyes and looked at Maya. Using a flashlight in the darkness, Maya was putting up my tent on a flat area between two pines. Glancing over at me, she said, Feel better? I nodded. Do you understand the process so far? I think so. I sent energy into the pain. Yes, but what we did earlier was just as important. You begin by looking at the meaning of the injury or illness, what its occurrence is pointing out about some fear in your life that is holding you back, manifesting in your body. This is what opens the fear block, so that the visualization can penetrate. After the block is open, then you can use pain as a beacon, raising the vibration in that area, and then in your entire body. But finding the origin of the fear is vitally important. When the origin of the illness or accident is very deep, it often requires hypnosis or intensive counseling. I looked at her for a moment, then said, You mentioned that prayer works. How's the best way to pray for someone who's not well? We're still trying to figure that out. It has something to do with the 8th insight process of sending the energy and love that flows through us from the divine source to the person, and at the same time visualizing that the individual will remember what they really want to do with their life. Of course, sometimes what the person remembers is that it's time to make a transition to the other dimension. When that's the case, we have to accept it. Maya was finishing with the tent, and added, Also keep in mind that the procedures I've recommended should be done in conjunction with the very best in traditional medicine. If we were near my clinic, I would take you in for a full examination. But in this case, unless you disagree, I suggest you stay here tonight. It's better if you don't move too much. As I watched, she set up my stove, turned it on, and placed a boiler containing freeze-dried soup on the flame. I'm going back into town. I need to get a splint for your ankle, and some other supplies just in case we need them. Then I'll hike back out and check on you. I'll bring a radio, too, to use if we have to send for help. I nodded. She poured her canteen's water into mine and looked over at me. Behind her, the last streak of light was vanishing toward the west. Did you say your clinic was near here? I asked. Actually, it's only about 4 miles to the south, she said, over the ridge, but there's no way to come into the valley from that direction. The only pass is the main road that comes in south of town. How did you happen to be here? She smiled and looked slightly embarrassed. It's funny. I had a dream last night about hiking into the valley again, and this morning I decided I would do just that. I've been working hard, and I guess I needed some time to reflect on what I'm doing at the clinic. My partner and I have a great deal of experience with alternative approaches, Chinese medicine, herbs. Yet at the same time, We have the resources of the world's best in traditional medicine at our fingertips through computer. I've dreamed about this kind of clinic for years. Standing up, she glanced at my ankle, then at me. I'm leaving now, she said. Try not to put any weight on your foot. What you need is complete rest. I'll be back in the morning. I think I must have looked anxious because she knelt down again and put both hands on the ankle. Don't worry, she said. With enough energy, there's nothing that can't be healed. Hatred, war. It's just a matter of coming together with the right vision. She patted my foot gently. We can heal this. We can heal this. She smiled once, then turned and walked away. I suddenly wanted to call out and tell her everything I had experienced in the other dimension, and what I knew about the fear and about the group coming back. But instead I remained quiet, fatigue overwhelming me, content to watch her disappear into the trees. Tomorrow would be soon enough, I thought, because I knew exactly who she was. The next morning I jerked awake, the shrill cry of a hawk high overhead pulling me into awareness. For a few moments I listened carefully, imagining her lofty rolls. She cried one more time, then stopped. I sat up quickly and looked through the tent flap. The day was cloudy but warm, and a light breeze swayed the treetops. There was no sign of the hum. I pulled on a pair of shorts. Taking an ace bandage from my pack, I carefully wrapped the whole joint, working the ankle carefully, and feeling very little pain. Then crawled out of the tent and stood up. After a few moments, I put weight on my foot and took a tentative step. The ankle felt weak, but if I limped slightly, it seemed to support me. I wondered, did Maya's procedure help, or was the ankle not hurt that badly? There was no way to know. Digging into my pack again, I retrieved a change of clothes, then grabbed the dirty dishes from the night before. Cautiously, I made my way back to the stream. When I located a place where I was shielded from view, I entered the water, finding it cold and refreshing. I lay there without thinking, trying to forget the anxiety rising in my gut, gazing out at the colors of the leaves above my head. Suddenly, I began to recall a dream from the night before. I was sitting on a rock. Something was happening. Will was there, and others. I vaguely remembered a field of blue and amber. I struggled a moment longer, but could recall nothing more. I noticed that the trees and bushes around me were suddenly amplified in appearance. Seconds later, I felt a pulling sensation in my solar plexus, and suddenly I was again streaking through the colors. When I stopped, the environment was pale blue and luminous, and Will was beside me. "Thank God you're back," he said, moving in closer. "You became so dense I couldn't find you." "What happened before?" I asked. "Why did the hum get so loud?" "I don't know." "Where are we now?" "It's a particular level where dreams seem to take place." I looked out into the blue. "You've been here before?" "Yes, I came here before I found you at the falls, although at the time I didn't know why." For a moment we both surveyed the environment again. Then Will asked, "What happened to you when you went back?" With excitement, I began to describe everything that had occurred, focusing first on Joel's forecast of civil collapse. Will listened intently, digesting every aspect of Joel's outlook. He was voicing the fear. I nodded. "That's what I think." "Do you suppose all of what he said is really occurring?" I asked. "I think the danger is that a lot of people are beginning to believe it's happening. Remember what the Ninth Insight said. As the spiritual renaissance progresses, it must overcome a polarization of fear." I caught Will's eye. "I met someone else, a woman." Will listened as I described my experience with Maya, particularly the injury to my ankle and her healing procedures. "I think Maya is the woman in William's vision," I added, "the woman who was trying to stop the war with the Native Americans." A sudden movement in the environment drew our attention. Another group of souls seemed to be forming about 100 yards away. They are probably here to help someone with their dreaming, Will said. I looked hard at him. They help us dream? Yes, in a way. Some other souls were here when you dreamed last night. How did you know about my dream? When you were jolted back into the physical, I tried to find you, but I couldn't. Then, when I waited, I began to see your face and moved here. The last time I came to this place, I couldn't quite grasp what was occurring, but now I think I understand what happens when we dream. I shook my head, not comprehending. He gestured out toward the souls. It apparently all happened synchronistically. These beings you see probably found themselves here just as I did earlier, by coincidence. And now they're probably waiting to see who comes by in their dream body. Suddenly the background hum grew louder, and I couldn't respond. I felt confused, dizzy. Will came closer to me, touching my back again. "Stay with me," he said. "There's some reason we need to see this." I struggled to clear my head, then noticed another form manifesting in the space beside the souls. At first I thought other souls were appearing, but then I realized the formation was much larger than anything I'd seen before. I finally realized a whole scene was being projected in front of us, like a hologram, complete with characters, setting, and dialogue. A single individual seemed to be at the center of the action, a man, vaguely familiar. The person before us was Joel. As we watched, the scene began to unfold, like the plot of a movie. I strained to follow along, but my head was still foggy. I couldn't quite understand what was happening. After several minutes, the drama seemed to end, and everyone disappeared. What was happening? I asked. The individual in the center of the scene was dreaming, Will said. That was Joel, the man I told you about, I replied. Will turned to me in astonishment. Are you sure? Yes. Did you understand the dream he just had? No, I couldn't quite get it. What happened? The dream was about a war of some kind. He was fleeing a bomb-ravaged city with shells exploding all around him, running for his life, thinking of nothing but safety and survival. When he successfully evaded the horror and climbed a mountain to look back at the city, he suddenly remembered that his orders had been to meet another group of soldiers and supply a secret part to a new device, which would make the enemy weapons inactive. To his horror, he now realized that because he had failed to show up, the group and the city were being systematically destroyed before his eyes. A nightmare, I commented. Yes, but it has meaning. When we dream, we unconsciously travel back to this sleep level, and other souls come and help us. But don't forget what dreams do. They clarify how to handle current situations in our lives. The seventh insight says to interpret dreams by superimposing the plot of the dream against the real situation facing us in life. I turned and looked at Will. But what role do the souls play? As soon as I had asked that question, we began to move again. When we stopped, the light was shifting to a rich green, but I could observe beautiful waves of amber circulating around us. When I focused intently, the amber streaks became individual souls. I glanced at Will, who was smiling broadly. This location seemed to carry an increased mood of celebration and joy. As I watched the souls, several moved directly in front of us and closed together into a group. Their faces were broad and smiling, although still hard to focus on for any length of time. They're so full of love, I said. See if you can pick up on their knowledge, Will advised. When I focused on them with this intent, I realized that these souls were associated with Maya. In fact, they were ecstatic about her recent self-revelations, especially her understanding of the life preparation her father and mother had provided. They seemed to know that Maya had experienced a full sixth insight review and was on the verge of remembering why she had been born. Will and I glanced at each other. Then he began to stare intensely at the group, a look of surprise on his face. "What are you seeing?" I asked. He nodded toward them without breaking his gaze, and I focused on the soul group as well, trying to pick up on their knowledge again. After several moments, I began to see Maya. She was immersed in the green environment. Her features seemed slightly different and were glowing brightly, but I was absolutely certain it was her. As I focused on her face, a holographic image appeared in front of us, an image of Maya again in the time of the 19th century war, standing in a log cabin with several other people, excited about stopping the conflict. She seemed to sense that accomplishing such a feat was just a matter of remembering how to attain the energy. It could be done, if only the right people came together with a common intention, she thought. Most attentive was a young man who was richly dressed. I recognized him to be the large man who was later killed with her in the forest. Racing forward, the vision moved to her failed attempt to speak with the army leaders, and finally to the wilderness, where she and the young man were killed. As we watched, she awakened after her death in the afterlife, and reviewed the lifetime, appalled at how single-mindedly, even naively, she had pursued her goal of stopping the war. She knew many of the others had been correct. The time wasn't right. We had not remembered enough of the afterlife knowledge to accomplish such a feat. Not yet. After the review, we saw her move into the green environment, surrounded by the same group of souls that were in front of us now. Amazingly, there seemed to be a common core expression in the faces throughout the group. At a certain level, beneath their features, the souls all resembled Maya. I glanced questioningly at Will. "This is Maya's soul group," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "It's a group of souls with whom she resonates closely," he said with excitement. "This makes perfect sense. One of the journeys I took before I found you was to another group who, in a way, looked like you. I think it was your soul group." Before I could say anything, there was a movement in the soul group in front of us. Again, an image of Maya was emerging. She seemed to be standing quietly in front of an intense white light, similar to the one we had seen at William's life review. She was aware that something very profound was happening. Her ability to move around in the afterlife had diminished, and her attention was shifting toward Earth again. She could see her prospective mother, newly married, sitting on a porch, wondering if her health would hold up well enough to have a child. Maya was beginning to realize the great progress that could be achieved if she were born to this mother. The woman had deep fears about her own health, and so would generate an awareness of health issues very quickly in the mind of a child. It would be the perfect place to develop an interest in medicine and healing. Will caught my eye. "We're seeing what occurred when she began to contemplate her current life," he said. Maya's focus moved to the prospective father, sitting next to the woman on the swing. His mind was virtually exploding with research possibilities and exotic biological questions he knew had never been posed before, the relationship between inspiration and the immune system. With him, she would be able to work through her own tendency to delude herself. She would have to think for herself and become realistic, right from the beginning. As we watched, her vision proceeded past her anticipated birth and into what might happen in childhood. She saw a multitude of specific people arriving in her life at just the right moment to stimulate learning and medical experience. Her vision moved to the meeting of her clinic partner and the establishment of a new model of healing. And then her vision revealed something else. She would be involved in a more global awakening. Before us, we saw her discovering of the insights, and then her discovery of a particular group, one of many independent groups, consisting of different backgrounds that would begin to gravitate together all over the world. These groups would remember who they were at a higher level and be instrumental in overcoming the polarization. She suddenly saw herself engaged in important conversations with one particular man. He was large, athletic, capable, and dressed in army fatigues. To my amazement, I realized that she knew he was the man with whom she had been killed during the 19th century. I focused on him intently and received another shock. This was the same man I had seen in William's life review, the work colleague he had failed to help awaken. Finally, Maya's vision seemed to be over, and we could see her again in the green environment, still surrounded by her group. Now they were watching a scene on Earth. Apparently, her prospective parents had indeed decided to conceive a child, and were coming together in the very act of love that would ensure her conception. Maya's soul group had intensified in energy and now appeared as a large whitish swirl of moving amber, drawing its intensity from the bright light in the background. I could sense the energy myself as a deeply felt, almost orgasmic level of love and vibration. Down below, the couple embraced, and at the moment of orgasm, a whitish-green energy seemed to flow from the light, passing through Maya and her soul group, and entering into the couple. With an orgasmic rush, the energy came through their bodies toward each other, pushing the sperm and egg toward their fateful union. As we watched, we could see the moment of conception and the miraculous joining of the two cells into one. Slowly at first, and then more rapidly, the cells began to divide and differentiate, finally forming the shape of a human being. When I looked at Maya, I realized that with every cell division, she became more hazy and out of focus. Finally, as the fetus matured, she disappeared from view completely. Her soul group remained. More knowledge seemed to be available on what we had just witnessed, but I lost concentration and missed it. Then, suddenly, the soul group itself was gone, and Will and I were left staring at each other. He seemed terribly excited. "What were we watching?" I asked. "It was the whole process of Maya's birth into her current lifetime," Will replied. "We got to see it all. Her awareness of prospective parents, what she felt might be accomplished, and then the actual way she was drawn into the physical dimension at conception." I nodded for Will to continue. "Did you notice how it worked?" he asked. "The act of lovemaking opens up a portal from the afterlife into the earthly dimension. The soul groups seem to exist in a state of extreme love even beyond what you and I can experience, extreme to the point that it feels orgasmic in nature. Sexual culmination creates an opening into the afterlife, and what we experience as orgasm is just a glimpse of the afterlife level of love and vibration as the portal is opened and the energy rushes through, potentially bringing in a new soul. We watch that happen. Sexual union is a holy moment in which a part of heaven flows into the earth." I nodded, thinking about the implications of what we had seen, then said, "Maya seemed to know how her life could turn out if she was born to these particular parents." "Yes, apparently, before we are born, each of us experiences a vision of what our life can be, complete with reflections on our parents and our tendencies going in to engage in particular control dramas, even how we might work through these dramas with these parents, and go on to be prepared for what we want to accomplish." "I saw most of that," I said, "but it seemed strange. Based on what she told me about her real life, her pre-life vision was more ideal than what really happened." "But that makes sense," Will said. "The vision apparently is an ideal guide for what our highest self intends to happen in life, the best-case scenario, so to speak, if everyone were following their intuitions perfectly. What actually occurs is an approximation of this vision, the best everyone can do under the actual circumstances. But all this is more 10th insight information about the afterlife that clarifies our spiritual experience of Earth, particularly the perception of coincidences, and how that sense of flow really operates. When we have an intuition or a dream to pursue a particular course in our lives, and we follow this guidance, and certain events transpire that feel like magic coincidences, we feel more alive and excited. The events feel destined, as though we knew they were supposed to happen. What we just saw puts all this into a higher perspective. When we have an intuition, a mental image of a possible future, we're actually getting flashes of memory of our birth vision, what we wanted to be doing with our lives at that particular point in our journey. But how does our soul group fit in? They share our birth visions and follow us through life, and afterwards stay with us while we review what happened. They act as a reservoir for our memories, maintaining the knowledge of who we are as we evolve. And apparently, when we're in the afterlife and one of them is born into the physical dimension, we act in the same capacity toward them. We become part of the soul group that supports them. So the soul groups are always sending us energy, I said, and hoping we will remember our birth visions? That's right. And that's why Maya's group was so happy? Will's expression grew more serious. They were happy because she was remembering why she was born to her particular parents, and how her life experiences had prepared her for a career in healing. But this was only the first part of her birth vision. She still had more to remember. I saw the part when she was meeting again in this life with the man with whom she was killed in the 18th century. But there were other parts that I couldn't understand. How much of that did you get? Not all of it. There was more about the rising fear. It confirmed that she's part of the group of 7 that William saw coming back. And she saw the group able to remember some kind of larger vision that connected with stopping the fear and whatever is happening in the valley, Will said. I was about to reply when my breath left me, forced out by a cramping pain that seized my stomach again. Simultaneously, another high-pitched screech rocked me backward. As before, I reached out for Will and saw his face fading out of focus. I struggled to look one more time, then completely lost my equilibrium, slipping again into freefall. Damn, I thought, lying flat on the rock, the coarse surface of the stone edging into my back. I was back at the stream again. Clumsily, I got to my feet, a slight pain throbbing in my ankle, and limped back into the forest. I uncovered my pack and prepared some food, moving very slowly without thinking. Even as I ate, my mind remained surprisingly blank, like after a long meditation. Then, slowly, I began to increase my energy, taking several deep breaths and holding them. Suddenly, I could hear the hum again. As I listened, a spontaneous image came to mind. I was walking east in the direction of the sound, in search of its cause. The thought terrified me, and I felt the old urge to flee. Instantly, the hum vanished, and I heard a rustling of leaves to my rear. I jerked around and saw Maya. "Do you always show up at the right time?" I stammered. "Show up? Are you crazy? I've been looking for you everywhere around here. Where did you come from?" "I was down by the stream." "No, you weren't. I've been looking down there." She stared at me for a moment, then glanced at my foot. "How's that ankle?" I managed to smile. "It's fine. Listen, I've got to talk to you about something. Someone, I don't know who it is doing some kind of experiment, or something like that, here in the valley. I think my friend Charlene is involved somehow, or maybe in danger. Someone in the Forest Service must have secretly approved this." She stared, trying to take it all in. I picked up my pack and took her hand. "Walk with me for a while, please. There's more I need to tell you." She nodded and grabbed her pack, and as we walked east along the edge of the stream, I told her the whole story, from meeting David and Will to seeing William's life review and listening to Joel. When I came to the part about her birth vision, I moved over to some rocks and sat down. She leaned against a tree to my right. "You're involved in this too," I said. "Obviously you already know that your life is supposed to be about introducing alternative techniques of healing, but there's more that you intended to do. You're supposed to be part of this group that William saw coming together." "How do you know all that?" "Will and I saw your birth vision." She shook her head and closed her eyes. "Maya, each of us comes here with a vision of how our lives can be, what we want to do. The intuitions we have, the dreams and coincidences, they're all designed to keep us on the right path, to bring back our memory of how we wanted our lives to unfold." "And what else did I want to do?" "I don't know exactly. I couldn't get it. But it had something to do with this collective fear that is rising in human consciousness. The experiment is a result of this fear. Maya, you intended to use what you've learned about physical healing to help resolve what's happening in this valley. You must remember She stood and looked away. "Oh, no. You can't put that kind of responsibility on me. I hate this kind of intrigue. Understand? I hate it. I finally have the clinic set up just as I want. You can't expect me to get involved in all this. You've got the wrong person." I looked at her, trying to think of something else to say. During the silence, I heard the hum again. Can you hear that sound, Maya? A dissonance in the air, a hum? That's the experiment. It's happening right now. Try to hear it. She listened for a moment, then said, "I don't hear anything." I grabbed her arm. "Try to raise your energy." She pulled away. "I don't hear a hum." I took a breath. "Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not supposed to happen this way." She looked at me for a moment. "I know someone with the sheriff's department. I'll try to get in touch with him for you. That's all I can do." "I don't know if that will help," I said. "Apparently not everyone can hear this sound." "Do you want me to call him?" "Yes, but tell him to investigate independently. I'm not sure he can trust everyone in the Forest Service." I picked up my pack again. "I hope you understand," she said. "I just can't be involved in this. I feel as though something horrible would happen." "But that's just because of what happened when you tried this before in the 18th century, here in this valley. Can you remember any of that?" She closed her eyes again, not wanting to listen. I suddenly saw a clear image of myself in buckskins, running up a hill, pulling a pack-horse. It was the same image I had seen before. The mountain man was me. I shook off the image. "It's okay," I said, giving up. "I know how you feel. When it happens this way, no one ever does." I picked up my pack and headed east, glancing back once at Maya. She looked guilty for an instant. Then an expression of relief swept across her face. I walked through thick woods toward the sound of the hum, keeping the stream in sight to my left, pausing only to rest my foot. About noon, the sound ceased, so I stopped to eat lunch and assess the situation. My ankle was swelling slightly, and I rested for an hour and a half before I resumed my journey. After covering only another mile, fatigue overwhelmed me, and I rested again. By mid-afternoon, I was looking for a place to camp. I spotted a small grassy knoll near the top of a hill, which looked like a perfect place to spend the night. As I approached, movement in the trees caught my eye. I slipped behind a large outcropping and looked again. What was that? A deer? A person? I waited for several minutes, then carefully moved away toward the north. As I inched along, I suddenly saw a large man 100 yards to the south of the knoll I had seen before, apparently setting up a camp himself. Staying very low to the ground and moving with skill, he deftly raised a small tent and camouflaged it with branches. For an instant, I thought it might be David, but I realized his movements were different, and he was too big. Then I lost sight of him. After waiting for several more minutes, I decided to move further to the north until I was completely out of sight. I'd been moving no more than 5 minutes when the man suddenly stepped out in front of me. "Who are you?" he asked. I told him my name and decided to be open. "I'm trying to find a friend." "It's dangerous out here," he said. "I would recommend that you go back. This is all private property." "Why are you out here?" I asked. He was silent, staring. Suddenly I remembered what David had told me. "Are you Curtis Weber?" I inquired. He looked at me for a moment longer, then abruptly smiled. "You know David Lone Eagle." "I only talked to him briefly, but he told me you were out here and to tell you he was coming into the valley, and that he would find you." Curtis nodded and looked toward his camp. "It's getting late. We need to get out of sight. Let's go up to my tent. You can spend the night up there." I followed him down a slope and up into the deep cover of larger trees. While I pitched my tent, he fired up his camp stove for coffee and opened a can of tuna. "You mentioned that you were looking for someone," Curtis said. "Who?" Briefly, I told him about Charlene's disappearance, and that David had seen her hiking into the valley. Also that I thought she had been seen coming in this direction. I didn't talk about what had occurred in the other dimension, but I did mention hearing the hum and seeing the vehicles. The hum comes from an energy-generating device. Someone's experimenting with it here for some reason. I can confirm that much. But I don't know whether it's being conducted by some secret government agency or a private group somewhere. He looked out at the valley. If I just knew where they were. Counting the private land and the national forest, there are tens of thousands of acres where they might be. I think they want to conduct the experiment and get out before anybody knows what happened. That is, if they can avoid a tragedy. What do you mean? They could totally ruin this place, make it into a twilight zone, another Bermuda Triangle, where the laws of physics are in unpredictable flux. He looked directly at me. The things they know how to do are incredible. Most people have no idea the complexity of electromagnetic phenomena. In the latest superstring theories, for instance, one has to assume this radiation emanates across 9 dimensions just to make the math work. This device has the potential to disrupt these dimensions. It could trigger massive earthquakes or even complete physical disintegration of certain areas. Well, how do you know all this? I asked. His face fell. Because I helped develop some of this technology. I was employed with a multinational corporation I thought was named Dell Tech, although later, after I was fired, I found out that Dell Tech was a totally fictitious name. This technology is composed of several very dissimilar parts, but basically it works this way. Imagine that the electromagnetic field of the Earth is a giant battery, which can provide plenty of electrical energy if you can tie into it in the correct way. For that, you take a very complicated electronic feedback inhibitor, which essentially mathematically enhances certain static output resonances. Then you tie several of these in a series, amplifying and generating the charge, and when you get the calibrations exact, presto, you have virtually free energy right out of the immediate space. You need a small amount of power to start, perhaps a single photocell or a battery, but then it's self-perpetuating. A device the size of a heat pump could power several houses, even a small factory. However, there are 2 problems. First, calibrating these mini-generators is unbelievably complicated. We had access to some of the largest computers in existence and couldn't do it. Second, we discovered that when we tried to increase the total output beyond this relatively small size by enlarging the mass displacement, the space around the generator became very unstable and began to warp. We didn't know it then, but we were tapping into the energy of another dimension, and strange things began to happen. Once we made the whole generator disappear, exactly like what happened in the Philadelphia experiment. Do you think they really made a ship disappear and show up again in a new location in 1942? Of course they did. There's a lot of secret technology around, and they're smart. In our case, they were able to shut our team down in less than a month and fire all of us without a breach of security because each team was working on an isolated part of the technology. Not that I wondered much about it then. I mostly bought the idea that the obstacles were just too great to proceed, so I thought it was dead-end research. I hadn't thought about the energy experiments in years until I moved into this area. You can imagine how shocked I was to walk into this valley and hear the same sound, this characteristic hum that I heard every day for years when we were working on the project. Someone has continued the research, and judging from the resonances, they're much farther along than we were. I tried to contact 2 of the people who could verify the sound and maybe go to the EPA or a congressional committee with me. But I found out one had been deceased for 10 years, and the other, my best friend when I was at the corporation, was also dead. He had a heart attack just a few days ago. His voice trailed off. Since then, he finally went on, I've been out here listening, trying to figure out why they're in this valley. Ordinarily, one would expect this kind of experiment to be done in a laboratory somewhere. I mean, why not? Its energy source is space itself, and that's everywhere. But then it dawned on me. They must think they're very close to perfecting the calibrations, which means they're working on the amplification problem. I think they're trying to tie into the energy vortexes in this valley in an attempt to stabilize the process. He stopped suddenly. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you heard of the insights? I stared for a moment, then said, Curtis, I have to tell you what I've been experiencing in this valley. You may find it unbelievable. He listened patiently as I described meeting Will and exploring parts of the other dimension. When I came to the life review, I asked, This friend of yours who recently died, was he named Williams? That's right. Dr. Williams. How did you know that? We saw him reach the other dimension after his death. We watched as he experienced the life review. Curtis appeared shaken. That's hard for me to believe. I know the insights, at least intellectually, and I believe in the probable existence of other dimensions. But as a scientist, the ninth insight stuff is much harder to take, literally. The idea of being able to communicate with people after death. You're saying that Dr. Williams is still alive, in the sense that his personality is intact? Yes. And he was thinking about you. He looked at me intently, as I continued to tell him about Williams' realization that Curtis and he were supposed to have been involved in resolving the fear, and stopping this experiment. I don't understand, he said. What did he mean when he talked about a growing fear? I don't know exactly. It has to do with a certain percentage of the population refusing to believe a new spiritual awareness is emerging. Instead, they think human civilization is degenerating. This is creating a polarization of opinion and belief. Human culture can't continue to evolve until the polarization is ended. I was hoping that you might remember something about it. He looked at me blankly. I don't know anything about a polarization, but I am going to stop this experiment. Williams seemed to understand the process for stopping it, I said. Well, we'll never know now, will we? As he said that, I fleetingly saw again the image of Curtis and Williams talking on the grassy hilltop, surrounded by several large trees. Curtis served our food, appearing upset, and we finished eating in silence. Later, as I stretched out and leaned against a small hickory, I glanced up the hill at the grassy knoll above us. 4 or 5 huge oaks made almost a perfect semicircle on its crest. Why didn't you camp up on the hill? I asked Curtis, pointing. I don't know, he said. The idea came to me, but I guess I thought it was too exposed, or maybe too powerful. It's called Cotter's Knoll. Do you want to walk up there? I nodded and rose to my feet, and Curtis led the way up the slope. At the top, in spite of the fading light, we could see almost a quarter of a mile toward the north and east. In the latter direction, a near full moon was rising above the tree line. Better sit down, Curtis advised. We don't want to be seen. For a long while we sat in silence, admiring the view and feeling the energy. Curtis took a flashlight out of his pocket and laid it on the ground beside him. Presently, Curtis looked over at me and asked, You smell something? Smoke? I sniffed the air. No, I don't think so. What kind of smoke do you mean? Cigar smoke. Dr. Williams smoked cigars that smell just like that. I can't believe he's gone. Suddenly, in that moment, I realized that this was the very spot where Williams saw himself meeting with Curtis. It was to take place right here. Seconds later, I observed a figure forming just beyond the trees. Do you see anything out there? I quietly asked Curtis, pointing in that direction. As soon as I spoke, the form disappeared. Curtis was straining to see. What? I don't see anything. I didn't respond. Somehow I had begun to intuitively receive knowledge, exactly as I had received it from the soul groups, except the connection was more distant and garbled. I could sense something about the energy experiment, a confirmation of Curtis's suspicions. The experimenters were indeed attempting to focus in on the dimensional vortexes. I just remembered, Curtis said abruptly. One of the devices Dr. Williams was working on years ago was a remote focus, a dish projection system. I'll bet that's what they're using to focus on the openings. But how do they know where the vortexes are? Immediately, I perceived an answer. Someone of a higher awareness pointed them out until they learned the spatial variances as they showed up on the remote focus computer. I had no idea what that meant. There's only one way, Curtis said. They would have to find someone to point them out, someone who could sense these higher energy locations. Then they could map out an energy profile of the site and focus precisely by scanning with a focus beam. Probably the individual wouldn't even know what they were doing. He shook his head. These people are vicious, there's no doubt about it. How could they do this? As if in response, I sensed other knowledge that was too vague to understand completely, but seemed to maintain that there was, in fact, a reason. But we had to first understand the fear and how to overcome it.